You wouldn't want to drink it. Potentially toxic green water that looked like pea soup and came from Lake Erie. The result of an algae bloom so widespread you could see the color difference on the lake from satellite photos taken in space.
This particular problem was a failure at all levels of government.
For more than 2 days this past summer, as the water on the lake, including around a Toledo water crib, turned green, almost 500,000 people couldn't drink or even shower in their water. They had to line up for bottled water.
I'm like, what do you mean we can't use the water?
As if they lived in a third world country.
It's been awful. It's been horrible.
Instead of Toledo.
We had to know that this day was coming, and it came.
We had no manual. We had nothing which would give us any idea as to how to handle this experience.
The Toledo water crisis was a wake-up call, not only for this city, but also for all of us who get our drinking water from Lake Erie. And to say Toledo's mayor was upset at some of what he heard that weekend would be an understatement.
I have 500,000 people right now that are looking to me to give them an answer, and the only answer I can possibly give them is we've got a bunch of idiots trying to figure this out.
The mayor described a conference call that weekend as hundreds of thousands of people waited for bottled water, where local, state, and federal scientists were defending their testing methods, but not agreeing on whether the water was safe to drink. So what was the standard test, the protocol, for determining if the water was safe?
There was no agreed upon protocol.
No agreed upon protocol?
No. There was no, across the state of Ohio, including the events that took place down at Lake St. Mary's, Grand Lake St. Mary's.
5 years ago, that western Ohio lake had a dangerously high concentration of microcystin, the toxin that can develop in blooms and renders water unsafe to drink. 2 years later, in 2011, Lake Erie had a huge bloom as well, and still, by 2014, no state standard for microcystin had been developed.
What do you think about that?
I think it's absolutely irresponsible.
We didn't have an agreed upon standard until the weekend of the emergency, and now we do.
I think there was some confusion.
Ohio EPA Director Craig Butler says his agency had issued guidelines statewide, but
it specifically did not address some of the issues we had to deal with to make sure we were getting a consistent result in the middle of the crisis in Toledo.
And I couldn't believe the fact that there was no standard test.
Meantime, here in Cleveland that weekend,
we're monitoring the water quality constantly here at the plant.
The water was showing no signs of a microcystin problem, in part because the lake off Cleveland is deeper than it is off Toledo, which makes it harder for algae blooms to form. But that weekend, Cleveland's water commissioner said some of the testing that showed problems in Toledo's water may have been wrong.
I do know they're wondering whether or not any of the tests were false positives.
How could that possibly be?
And we first make a slide.
We got a demonstration of water testing inside the lab of the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District. The district doesn't test drinking water, but it does test our beach water for microcystins and other toxins. The testing is done at very low levels, parts per billion. This instrument used to test the water is called a microplate reader. It costs about $10,000. Now listen carefully.
The accuracy just on the standards alone are plus or minus 25%. So when you get to that low level, you do have a chance of either a false positive or a false negative.
So 1/4 of the time when you're using the equipment you're using currently, the results could be inaccurate.
That is correct.
Biologists increase the accuracy by running multiple tests, and their hard work almost always leads to reliable results. But if they were able to use a mass spectrometer, which can cost close to $500,000 to test the lake's water.
If we were able to spend the money to get the top of the line instrument, the accuracy and the identification would be extremely easy.
And that's what Mark's boss wants.
We at the sewer district now are keenly also aware that this equipment is needed.
Julius Chach says the problems the blooms have caused in recent years have made it critical to use the best equipment to test water quality, no matter the price.
We're spending millions and millions of dollars on assuring the quality of Lake Erie, and yes, this would definitely be a good investment.
In part because the false positives that experts worried about during the Toledo water crisis are only the second worst problem that can occur if the test results are unreliable.
The problem with having a false positive is we may tell people that there's a danger there and it's not, but the worst problem is a false negative. If we say that toxin is not out there, and it really is.
In the aftermath of the Toledo crisis, the Ohio EPA says it is moving forward on all fronts, from helping water districts buy equipment to dealing with the sources of algae blooms.
We're going to develop a comprehensive strategy here and roll it out in a series of steps.
Steps that will hopefully prevent another weekend like the one Toledo lived through.
We want to attract people to this region. We can't do it with a reputation of having the worst beaches and the worst water in the country year after year. We have to change that image.
A green and toxic Lake Erie can't happen again. But without changes,
it will come again, just like the river burned.
Cleveland, of course, became the butt of jokes and ridicule for decades after the Cuyahoga River caught fire in 1969. Then last summer, large portions of the western basin of Lake Erie turned green from a toxic algae bloom that rendered Toledo's water unsafe to drink for more than 2 days, turning people's lives upside down.
My husband woke me up this morning. He's like, don't drink the water. And I'm like, what?
The toxic lake water forced nearly 500,000 people living in or near a major Ohio city to seek out bottled water.
And I had to drive about 45 minutes to find some.
Imagine if what people once thought of the river, they soon start thinking of the lake.
You don't want to have the burning river image.
There are 3 main sources of pollution that lead to the algae blooms on Lake Erie: stormwater overflows, faulty septic systems, and farm fertilizer runoff. But to deal with the problem of the blooms on the lake means likely reducing the amount of pollution from each of those sources that reaches the lake. And that may be easier said than done. Sewer districts treat rainwater, but when it rains too hard, the sewer systems can be overwhelmed. Untreated water, including untreated wastewater, then flows into the lake from huge pipes like this one at Edgewater Park and this one along Mill Creek, which eventually reaches the lake. And when they let loose, including with untreated sewer water, they let loose. Still, the U.S. EPA says sewer district pollution, even including untreated wastewater like this, accounts for only about 20% of the problem pollution that reaches Lake Erie.
We're dealing with a fifth of the problem that is already regulated, so that really won't get us, especially for the western basin, won't really help to solve the problem.
Which brings us to farming.
When you're talking about agriculture, production, and safe drinking water, not mutually exclusive. We can do both.
There's no question that agriculture contributes to the algae blooms. The questions are how much and what should be done about it. And if you ask some farmers, they are getting too much of the blame.
Can't blame it all on the farmer.
Kenny Turn says heavy rains can wash fertilizer and manure off of farms, and that type of runoff is a major source of the algae blooms on Lake Erie. But Kenny says his livelihood depends on fertilizing his fields.
If you didn't put fertilizer down, you're going to get 30 bushel the acre corn. We put fertilizer down, you can get 150.
So how can we protect the farmers and the lake? That's the question, and it centers in part around whether the government should impose new rules regarding fertilizer and manure runoff.
Trying to do this purely on a voluntary basis isn't going to get us there. Didn't get us there when the river was burning.
More regulation is not what any farmer wants.
You heard that a lot here at the Ohio State Farm Science Review, the largest agriculture show in Ohio. Farmers say many of them drink the water from Lake Erie too and have an incentive even beyond that to do the right thing.
Nobody wants to see fertilizer leave their field. They paid money for it. We've already been doing an enormous amount of work.
The Ohio Farm Bureau Federation has sunk a lot of money into studying this problem. There are new rules requiring fertilizer certification for medium-sized and larger farms, and newer farming methods such as so-called cover crops that help to keep fertilizer on the soil and out of the lake.
We are absolutely dedicated to solving this problem.
You have to solve it or you could get regulation you don't want. Is that a fair analysis?
Well, you already have a lot of regulation on farmers.
You could get more. Is that...
And could you get more? Absolutely you could get more. But farmers want to make sure we solve the problem.
We can't get the reputation that occasionally you cannot drink the water out of this lake.
I mean, first, it's public safety. Second is, you look at economic development.
Representative Dave Hall is a key player in the lake's algae bloom controversy as the Republican chairman of the Ohio House Agriculture Committee.
What we're doing now is basically a Band-Aid over the system.
Hall believes the state's windfall from new taxes on oil and gas production provides a unique opportunity. Take up to $50 million every year of that tax money, a huge sum, and use it for clean water programs to help sewer districts, farmers, and failing septic systems.
We have an opportunity, and I don't want to get the box of Band-Aids out again. We had one scare with Toledo.
And we can't have it again, or that will be our reputation.
Yes.
Northern Ohio has worked hard to put the reputation as the place where the river burned behind it. As leaders grapple with what to do about the algae blooms on Lake Erie, everyone understands this region must now avoid becoming the place where sometimes you can't drink the water. Friday's beautiful weather means beach season is definitely here. We both play on the shores of Lake Erie and we get drinking water from it. But last summer, part of western Lake Erie turned green on the surface, and 500,000 people living in or near Toledo couldn't drink their water.
It's been awful.
They had to line up for hours for bottled water over an entire weekend. The problem? Toxic microcystin inside a huge algae bloom on the lake that could be seen from satellites in space. But scientists reportedly weren't completely clear that weekend if Toledo's water was unsafe to drink. One possible factor, no agency anywhere across northern Ohio had the best piece of equipment for testing water quality. It's called a mass spectrometer. The Northeast Ohio Sewer District showed us how they tested the quality of beach water with older equipment. This is last year. Listen carefully.
The accuracy just on the standards alone are plus or minus 25%.
That means 1 out of 4 times the test results could be wrong. At the time, we talked to the head of the sewer district, Julius Chach.
I'm surprised that we're 2014 and we're not using the best equipment. Does that make sense to you?
Well, there's a lot of contaminants out there that we're testing for, and we're updating equipment all the time. And it is unfortunate in this particular case that equipment is not being utilized in the state anywhere.
To their credit, Julius Chach and the leadership of the sewer district took the issue to heart and almost immediately began the process of acquiring a mass spectrometer in time for this year's beach season.
We saw that there was an immediate need, and we knew we had the resources to fill that need.
And here's the result, the sewer district's new $320,000 mass spectrometer.
Fair to say this is about 5 times more accurate than your old equipment?
Oh, I think that would be fair enough to say, yes.
And that accuracy makes a difference.
There's quite a bit more quality control that goes along with it, so we have a lot more confidence in our numbers.
And that should give all of us more confidence that scientists will know for sure the quality of the lake's water. Bill Scheel, Fox 8 IT.